Hello, welcome to Excel Highway. Today's video is the second video in the series of a cleaning service system I created. And in today's video, I'm going to share with you a payment tracking feature that I built that will help you track payments owed by your customers and will allow you to create invoices and receipts from here on Google Sheets and send them via email. This is the second part of the series. In the first part, we talked about working on the job schedule. Okay, how to build the job schedule, how to create your staff list with working days, how to build an employee schedule and send them the schedule for each person, and how to see a team schedule with some insights on what's going to happen. So if you want to check that out, I will add a link in the description for the first video. But today we're going to talk finance. So in the job schedule, there is the price that you maintain. There is the job status. Currently I have two options, done or scheduled. And there's the payment status, which is automatic. And basically it has three options. So we're using ifs. So ifs, N3 is done, meaning the job is done, and S3, which is the balance. So if it's an error and the job is done, I want to send an invoice. What does balance mean? Balance is going to check what is the balance of the job in the finance database. So it's checking this basically. And if I don't have a value, it means I never created an invoice. If I never created an invoice, I want to flag it to myself that I have to create an invoice. That's the first one. Obviously, if the job is only scheduled, I don't want to send an invoice. So only when the job is done, I want it to appear as send invoice. Second option is I do have a balance, meaning I created an invoice, but it's equal to 0. That means I have received all the payments. So I know that my payment status is done. And the third option is I have a balance which is greater than 0. So I still need to receive money from customers. So I know that I'm in a position where the invoice is sent. And basically it means invoice sent, and now I need to receive funds. So those are the three options for payment status that are automatically generated. I've also created a button here to complete a job. So you can go, of course, over here and just change it from done scheduled, but I also made it here that you can click on this button, and with a Google App Script, Google Sheets App Script, it will just change the status to done. It's a very simple code. I will show you anyway. We have to go over some code here, but I'll show how I did it with, it's called this. And just like before, I heavily used ChatGPT to create the codes here on AppScript. I'm less familiar with AppScript as I am in VBA, and this is a really good option to use ChatGPT and just fine tune it with some trial and error. So you can see what it does. Basically, it's looking for a sheet called job schedule, etc., etc. If I selected something that doesn't make sense, if it's row number 1, and then I'm just gonna get the status, and if the status is already done, I won't allow it, and otherwise, if everything is okay, just set it up to be as done. A very simple code, again, just to speed up things. So that is the job schedule, the updates from previous video. Let's jump to the bookkeeping section. So this is where you mainly are supposed to work. You have the payment status, okay? So the three ones. You can flag what jobs you need to send the invoice. It's going to show you the data. What jobs you should start collecting money, invoice sent, and which jobs you have collected everything and they're done. Let's start with the send invoice, and let's see how this whole sheet is built. So basically, it's just simple filtering. So I'm filtering, in this case, A and B columns of the job schedule, and I'm always going to have a constant if column O equals A2. It's a very simple filter. Column O is where I have the payment status, and just show me all the rows for columns A and B, columns F through J, and that will take us here. The job status itself, another filter, column N. And lastly, we have these, which is the received balance and invoice ID. Those are different. So the received, that's going to take the sum of this sheet, which this is going to sheet that's basically saving all my receipts and invoices. So it's going to check how much I received. Am I looking at column E? Okay, so all the received based on the job ID because it's a unique value. And the balance is the gap between the price and the received. And the invoice ID is just going to show me in the finance ID, in the finance database, I'm looking for the job ID, and that's going to return the invoice ID. The assumption is it's a one-to-one. So you normally don't have more than one invoice per job. Of course, you can do that if you want. Just make sure that you properly manage it. You may have to manually adjust things if you do that way. That's how this table is built. Next, we have the next invoice ID and next receipt ID. That is the max of the finance for these columns. It's just going to show me what is the next number, just so it's a unique invoice and receipt ID. Now there is app script code to build that on your own. I don't. I found that it sometimes doesn't work properly for me, so I just like to do it manually. So in the bookkeeping sheet, you play with the different statuses and just see the lines that you need to process. So these are the lines that the job is completed. You see done, and there's no invoice. So I want to create an invoice. So I click on one of the job IDs, click on new invoice, have a script. It will give me this message. You can see the line is removed and it takes me to the template sheet. And now in the template sheet, this is a template that you can build on your own, of course. I put here the company details, computerized document statement, the invoice number and the invoice date, which is today. The person that's, sorry, the details of the customer, who is it for, the address and the email. These are coming from the job schedule sheet. What was done, this is again coming from the job schedule, the price, the quantity, and the total. In this case, it's always going to be ×1, but of course, if you build this, when you build this on your own, you can make any adjustments that you want, update the code, whatever you want to do. So it will create this nice template. Basically, you can see how I build it over here. So whenever you click on select receipt or select invoice, oh, we'll get to that soon. Okay. So back to bookkeeping. So that's number one. What it does, it creates a template, but it also adds a line here in the invoice. So you see that invoice number is number 9. It's for job 16. The invoice date, the price. So far, nothing was received. The balance. So these three are actually formulas that are copied from here, which I always like to use. Formulas which are easy to control. So basically the code will generate this row and then copy the formulas from the first row. So now I have an invoice, and that job is now in the status of invoice sent. You see it's here. Okay. And again, this is the information from the job schedules. That's the job date. And I can see now that I have an invoice with a number, but so far nothing was received. So I can click over here, click on payment. Payment is going to ask me how much was paid. And let's say I want to say I paid 400. So I'm going to get this error message, payment amount exceeds the balance of 318. You cannot charge more than the invoice. Let's say I got one payment of 200. I get this nice message. Again, it brings you to the template with the receipt that I just created. You can see the payment, the amount, and now the balance of this invoice. The reason it takes you to the template is from here you have an option to send an email. So if I now click on send email, this person doesn't have an email, so I think it's going to be an issue, but we'll find someone Let's just add an email to Tom Green. This is job 16, Tom at something like that. Okay, now I have an email and you see it automatically appear. So by the way, adjustments you make will impact the template. So if I click on send email, it's going to send an email and I'll show you how it looks. It looks something like this. If I go to, and you can see the receipt that we just created now. So that's why I always bring you to the template. Now back to the bookkeeping, we still see the job because we have a balance. We received 200, but the balance is 118. So when you click on payment, as before, there's a new line over here that has a receipt ID, the receipt date, and the connecting invoice ID because they all have to be linked. All right. So now I'm back to bookkeeping and I got the remainder of the funds. So I'm going to put 118. Receipt line added successfully. Now this line will go away. Again, I have the second receipt. So when you see the balance is zero now, this is the second receipt. If I go back to bookkeeping, the invoice sent is gone. Now if I change to status done, I will see that line over here. Everything was received. That's related to using the bookkeeping sheet. In the template sheet, there are two more buttons here, select receipt, select invoice. So you can select a certain invoice. It's going to ask you for the invoice number. If I put in a number that doesn't exist, I'm going to get this error message. Let me select an invoice that does exist. Invoice data ready. And now we see it says invoice number 2 with the invoice information. If I select receipt, I will see the information for the receipt plus the payment. So how is this created? First, let me show you this part, all the functions here, and then the actual code for the 3 buttons, 5 buttons. Okay, so this is where I basically use the information, the invoice or receipt selected to pull the information, then present it here. So it's kind of easy to track. So first off, I'm checking if it's a receipt or an invoice. So whenever you click one of those or one of those, it will update the name here to invoice. So if this says invoice, you can see it changes and also removes the lower part. The number is the number. The document date, I'm looking for the document date of the invoice. So I'm either looking for, sorry, not the invoice. I don't know because I have 2 databases, so I need to know if I'm looking for a receipt date or an invoice date. So based on that, you see there's 2 VLOOKUPs depending on whether K3 is a receipt or not. So very simple code or function. If it's a receipt, check the columns H. If it's a invoice, go to A through C. The invoice ID, if it's a receipt, I'm going to look up the receipt over here, right? Because I have that connection. But if it's an invoice, then I'm just going to use that number because I already have an invoice. The job ID is the invoice. I'm using the invoice number. So now I have all 3 data points. So I'm going to have the job ID, the invoice ID, and the receipt ID if it exists. Email is a VLOOKUP from the job schedule based on the job ID. And the subject of the email, in this case, it's the receipt number and from and the name of the company. So that's the schedule, the subject that you see. So that's how I built the information or the parameters to build the template. So this is constant. This is your information. This is constant. This is just a combination of a receipt and number. This is a combination of the receipt or the invoice date, and I'm using text on a date just to make sure it comes out properly, because if you don't use text, it's just going to concatenate a number. and it doesn't look good. This part, um, it's a combination of text and a parameter. So I'm going to use VLOOKUP from the job schedule based on the job ID. So I get the name, address, and email from the job schedule based on ID number. Same for the work done, the price. Quantity is always one. Total, multiply that by that. And the balance, first off, you see that if this is a receipt, I want to check how much I have in the finance database. So how much was received so far on that invoice ID. But if it's not a receipt, if it's an invoice, I want to show blank also for the header. So just because if it's just the invoice, I haven't received anything yet, so no point showing balance. The headers here also have that trick, so it's checking if it's an invoice or receipt. If it's an invoice, these are blank. If not, there's the headers. And I'm using a filter um, to take the information relevant to the specific receipt number. Okay, you could use VLOOKUP if you want. Both would work. So that's how I created this sheet, the template. In the bookkeeping, I think we covered everything, and in the finance, we also covered everything. Now let's take a quick look at the code. Again, the codes I created using ChatGPT and some back and forth to look to see how it looks. Send email, that's the previous one. Okay, here we go, invoice. So this is the button for clicking on the new invoice button. So you can see it creates the sheet names, checks if everything's existing, yada, yada, yada. Look at the active row, checking if the number already exists. So I can't create another invoice if I already have one. And then it's going to take the information like the invoice ID number. That's the next one. And get the information, job ID, today's date, because later it's going to paste that. That's those three parameters that it's going to paste over here. And then I want more information. I want the customer name, email address, amount, and price. Find the next row in finance database, enter the information. Actually, I think I don't use that anymore. I used that before, but it's not relevant anymore. Using a different method, so that's not important. Previously, I used AppScript to also update the template. I just found that it's too confusing that way, and I preferred some direct functions and just changing the number. So that's when it enters the information into finance. That's to copy the first row. Then it will also, I'll do that. Again, I don't need that. This looks for the job ID and I have it. So technically I can erase some of the codes here. I do need to update the template. So here's where I update K5 with the invoice ID number and K3 telling it the template that this is now an invoice. So that's updating both. So you can see the job ID and all the other information I'm taking directly. I don't need the code for that. And this is the message I get at the end. The receipt is very, very accurately, very, very similar to the invoice. A few differences, obviously, is that you need also the invoice ID to get that. And of course, the way that you update is different because you have a different text. The invoice from database and receipt from database. This is for these buttons. So these are now very, 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 very simple buttons. All they do is give you that pop-up of what number, checks that the number exists, and if it does, it will just save that number here and change the text if needed. That's all it does, because everything else is automatic. So here's how you create the pop-up message. Here it's checking if you entered something, checks if it exists. Okay. And then eventually that's all it does, right? It's the same for the receipt, just checking in a different column. column H. Email, this is the email button that you click over here. Again, I tried to really simplify it. Let's see what it does. It's looking for the recipient in K13, that's over here. And if you don't have a recipient, you get this message. Let's try. All right, no email address. Please enter an email address. So that tells you what you need to do. Then all the variables for the different building of the email, converting to HTML. This is all automatic. I don't know what Everland does. Formatting and eventually sending. And again, this is all generated by ChatGPT. It's a very simple code and it does it very easily. So you can play with that and adjust and say, I want this, I want that, I want colors, I want other things, and play with it as you see fit. All right, so that's the second part of the cleaning service system. Using this system, you can generate receipts and invoices, track your payments, and understand your position. You'll also be able to see it here in the job schedule in the main screen. Of course, you can build dashboards on it and whatever you want. And again, this is the second part. There's going to be a more that I will record in the future. So please subscribe so you don't miss out. And I'm happy to read your comments. And the file will be available for purchase on my Patreon, but of course you can follow along and build it on your own. All right, take care.